maple syrup. Haha.
Maple syrup.
Yay! Maple syrup. Yay! Welcome. Hey, everybody. We're here today with Naomi Clark. Naomi is a guest that we've been trying to get on the show for probably close to 2 years. I'm not actually sure of the date. I should go look while Jesse's asking questions. I can go look.
But welcome. Facebook friend history.
Yeah,
so when we were
exactly. That's true.
Talking about it.
How long have we been friends? Then that's the date.
Yeah, that's when it all started.
Exactly. And look, everybody, Jesse's back, and Erica's not here tonight. Erica is dealing with tummy troubles. Not hers, her family's. Not everybody in her family. It's just one or two people. Probably just one. It's not like a localized pandemic in her house or anything like that. It's just one person. And Jesse's back. Hey, Jess, what's going on, bud?
Hey, not too much. It's now sunlight up here for about 13 hours a day and getting longer. It's incredible.
Yeah. So. It's going to be like a whole new world up there, like quite literally.
Yeah. No, it has been. So yeah.
Have you been planning like trips out and about?
A little bit. I've done some local hiking within town, but this weekend, my manager is taking me out into the proper bush, and we're going out to one of the like poorly marked trails with some fire starting equipment, and just gonna go wander into the woods, set a fire, hang out, and then that'll be fun. So while there's still snow on the ground, which will last for like maybe a month and a half.
Mm-hmm. So for those of you who don't know, Jesse is up in the Northwest Territories doing stuff.
Yeah, working for the government.
Yeah, working for the gov. But experiencing the north, like the north. The real north. And
not even the real north. There is so much more north that way.
Oh, yeah, it's like endless plains of that much north. It's like super north. Yeah, so you're in the north, not the super north.
No, that's right.
Okay. But today we've come here to bring Naomi Clark. Naomi Clark is the designer of... So what would you say like the most noteworthy thing that you've worked on is, Naomi?
Oh, gosh. It depends on which time period you're talking about. Like, so probably for recent years, and maybe the reason that I'm here on Maple Syrup would be Consentacle, which is a 2-player card game about having sex with aliens.
Yes. Jesse.
And Jesse has a copy of it right there.
There you go. And then other than analog stuff, you also obviously work in the digital space. You work like all over games, RPGs.
Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah, like I had a whole previous incarnation as a game designer where the thing I was probably most well known for was Lego Digital Designer, which is a whole building system that I did with Lego that was used for many years to run its like online building and like order your own Lego model system. And yeah.
Seriously? So your stuff was in like the mock system or whatever it's called?
Yeah, it was sort of helped run the mock system. Like I helped a guy get that started. Well, that was many years ago, hilariously. And that's strangely why I also have a patent on the building system that is used in like Minecraft and other things like that.
Oh, that's incredible. That's so neat. Well, that makes sense.
So like that's like a whole different thing, right? And so I started making digital games like probably in the early to mid 90s, because I was working on like really early MMOs back when we had like hundreds of people in games that had no graphics, just text on old MUDs, as I recall back then. But so I've worked on all sorts of things since then. And now, and actually, these days I tend to do more analog work, in part because it's easy to pick up and like do a little project by myself or with a few collaborators. And the digital projects in my life have tended to be longer.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. That's really actually kind of a fascinating like trail, right? From like digital stuff and then finding a new home almost in analog. What about analog, other than the ease of just picking up and going with like crayons and a bunch of paper,
just like note cards and like scribbling and scratching and stuff.
What else is there about it?
I think it's really interesting as somebody who's done a lot of digital design. The need to like they stay relatively minimal in an instruction set compared to a video game, right? And I got started making analog games because I was doing paper prototypes for digital games, right? And that's a method of sort of thinking about game mechanics in a very like structural, simple, stripped down way that that like more and more game designers have been learning, especially as I since I teach at NYU now, I also teach students how to do paper prototyping. And one of the great things about making a paper prototype is that you have to make something that can be operated somehow by a human being, like not a complicated algorithm. So you can't really paper prototype an AI, like a very complicated AI, but you can paper prototype a simple AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of how, like single player board games kind of took this inspiration from AI programming a little bit, right? And so I don't know. I find the relationship between the two fields really interesting, and and so some people even say I like to paper prototype because it means like I have to strip down like the woolly, overly complex sprawl of the way my game's running and actually make it a little bit more elegant. And so I kind of like thinking inside that box is really nice. And then the other thing, I mean, Consentacle, when I made that game, I think part of what I was setting out to do, maybe not entirely deliberately, was make a game that I couldn't do digitally, because it's all about interaction between human beings. Like I guess you could do it face to face with digital aids, but it would really not be the same experience. Like I don't think it would be anywhere near as good. So just the combination of physical affordances like cards and having just physical objects between you rather than a screen, I think it's just it's a very different vibe, and it's something I'm very interested in. Also because I feel like analog games might be around after the collapse of our current industrial technological system, right? So if you really want to design something durable that that might be around in a few hundred years, like don't make a video game. Those are all going to be gone.
I mean, it could be gone. A video game could be gone in 5 years. Doesn't even.
They could be gone a lot. A lot of the video games I made in the 2000s are already gone, man. Because like Flash got shut down just at the beginning of this year. Because they're all gone, right? Yeah. So analog games, so they'll stand the test of time.
They kind of do. Jess, do you have any questions?
No, we can move to design philosophy.
Which
you changed the tag there. So yeah, you want to tell us? I don't actually. You said you've been doing. Yeah, go ahead. Just go. Design.
Do I have a design philosophy? Gosh, I guess it's that I think games are inherently anti-work and anti-productive and they're like antisocial in some way, even though they're also highly social experiences. When I say antisocial, I mean they're against society. Like whatever is good for society, games are against that. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't be repurposed. I mean, like donkeys are also against society when you get down to it, but they can be put into harnesses and forced to pull plows. Okay. Games are the same way. So you can make an educational game, but it's a little bit like making a donkey do something. And so I don't know. There's this inherent.
Can I quote you on that somewhere, like in a paper?
Yeah, absolutely.
That is awesome. Okay.
Yeah, that's
games are like
that's basically my opinion on the Games for Change field, which I've also worked in. Right? It's like, well, you can do this, but really, mostly games want to kick people in the butt, or kick something in the butt. I don't know. I keep looking for the right word for this. I think there's something a little bit inherently. I'm going to use this word for now. Inherently stupid about games. But it's not exactly stupid. It's like I needed a better word than that, because it is a little bit about this spirit of resistance. Like if you try to make a game about something, it's also usually about the opposite of that at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
So would the word subversive maybe fit better?
Maybe, yeah. Or it's, but that's almost too smart and highbrow, right? To be like, oh, I'm really subversive. Like that's like subversive is a word that a clove cigarette smoking 19-year-old uses. But that same teenager 6 years earlier when they were 13, then it's like it's more like that. It's just like.
Okay, cool. So I know there's a couple people watching who are very big on words and definitions. Sarah and Adam are out there watching. If you have any words that are better than subversive for Naomi, that might help. This is fascinating to me because as you're saying this, and I'm good friends with Scott Nicholson, Games for Change and things like that. He's totally into that. And as you were saying that, I was saying I would love to see a debate between Naomi and Scott. It would be brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, I see both sides of it a little bit. I mean, I agree with the spirit of what you're saying, Naomi. I've also done educational games and have advocated for the use of games in the classrooms, and actually never actually published a paper on it because I quit academia before I got around to it. But I had a draft of a paper that was like taking an approach to game design and promoting it as an approach to curriculum design. Like, let's use thinking about games as a way of just think about building education, like building the.
Hey, Jess, that's what white papers are for, buddy.
Yeah, but I don't want to finish it.
Okay. I'm just saying.
I don't care. Academia.
That would ruin it if Jesse actually finished it.
Yeah, no, it's got so much potential.
No, that is the story of my life. Like that actually was the story of my life before I designed games. If I ever finished something, it would be ruined. So I never finished anything. And then I started designing games.
So we're talking about that anti-productive spirit. I think that's what Sarah's contribution was. So.
Can't be a game designer.
Yeah. Maybe the word is playful. Maybe that's just what playful is. We can just use that word.
No, I do like your view as it's anti that. It's like so. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. I'm not as young as I look, I guess. My students today, they were freaked out to find out that I was almost 50. Like I was on stream with them and I said, oh yeah, I'm talking about development in young adulthood. I said, oh, when we're 25, this happens. And I said, but when you're almost 50 like me, and they're like, what? In the chat? They're like, you're not 50.
They're like, you have like 50-year-olds have white hair and big beards.
Right? Exactly. Except unless you're like me and you can't grow a big beard. And your hair will almost never turn totally white. But that's what I was talking about today is that, yes, everybody's hair actually does turn white at some point in life. It's just later for people who have a lot of, pigment in their hair. Anyway, but the idea of it being anti-something, and the reason why I said 70s and 80s is because I grew up in the punk movement of music. And this almost sounds punk. Like it sounds like, anti-disestablishmentarianism or whatever that word is. Sarah, help me out here. And then it also sounds very just have a punk ethos to game design. And that to me is really interesting. I've always fancied myself as a punk. Just kidding. That sounds like a clove smoking 19-year-old again. But the idea of it being purposely and from the get-go trying to shake the foundation of something, that's interesting. That's a really interesting viewpoint. And I know Jesse and I have gone into RPG design like that, but I don't think we've ever thought about that from board game design standpoint, which is interesting to me, to be honest.
I'll let you say something before I. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, me. Did I open my mouth? Yeah, there's such an interesting history to this, right? Where of games being viewed as something that's dangerous to society, right? If you you can go all the way back to like the first casinos in Venice, or the early moral panics about how games were terrible, right? Like about the origin of the spinners, right? Like the board game spinner, right? Because dice were immoral,
dice
right?
are evil.
Yeah, dice are evil. I don't know. So that keeps happening over and over again. And I think there's a reason for that. And I don't know. Part of the reason I'm interested in recapturing this as an ethos of games and game design is because then we could stop having all of this anxiety over when are we going to be accepted? When is society going to accept that games are not pernicious and evil? When are my parents going to finally accept that I like to play games, right? There's always this sort of mommy, daddy, just let me play games, sort of pathetic insecurity hovering around some of the conversation around games, right? Like
you're
we
not
have to
wrong.
convince the government and the media and academia that games are serious, important stuff, you know. And I'm so tired of that now.
Well, yeah, because you're in the midst of it. That's
Yeah,
really
probably.
interesting.
Yeah.
Jess.
Yeah. What was I going to say? Two thoughts across all of that. One, games are playful, important stuff. I don't know that they need to be serious, important stuff, though, which I think is kind of what you're getting at. And two, it's interesting, Sen, when you pointed out that you and I have gone intentionally into RPG design, thinking about being subversive or playful or like trying to kick something intentionally. We had an idea about what we wanted the thing to kick. I like that metaphor. And so then that gets me wondering about if games are partly in the business of being donkeys and kicking things, what happens when designers don't go into their design with the intent? You just end up kicking something at random, kicking something unintentionally,
or not kicking at all.
I mean, I think you do end up kicking, but you end up right.
Yeah, well, you end up getting something weird, right? Like, well, I don't know. Sometimes people try to do something really good and noble, and they end up doing the opposite, right? Like that was the case with that game Spent from Urban Ministries of Durham, which is a simulation of being on the edge of poverty and potentially losing your home and having to like manage your resources really carefully. That there was a study on that game that was done by a grad student at Princeton that found, it actually makes a bunch of players less sympathetic towards poor people, because they were like, well, I was able to figure out how to beat that game. Right. Yeah, so like I think sometimes that kind of thing happens in various ways, right? Like an unintentional statement about what's being about the subject matter of a game. I think that's we could probably find some examples in board games, in interesting ways, right? But then sometimes like games just get away from the creators, right? Like due to glitches or emergent properties of the game or new ways that people are playing it or something like that. I think they're a little bit hard to tame. And that's kind of nice, right? I think that for me is part of why some designers are so conservative, that they're just like, okay, I'm going to play. I know how this works. There's nothing weird's going to happen. I'm just going to make another game of this type. I'm going to stick to this genre, right? I think it may not be totally intentional.
Interesting insight.
Yeah,
really
it might not be totally intentional, right? They might not be trying to just copy something, but there's a certain fear that I think is natural when you are, I don't know, making something that could just turn into a different sort of organism completely and run away from you. And so that also business people who realize that are like, yeah, could you just make another one of those games that we already know works, please? Like it's just a capitalist logic, right? That there would be that conservative approach. Yeah.
That's really fascinating. Because like you look at games by say Stefan Feld or Uwe Rosenberg, and they're all like very similar-ish games, and they have like a niche that they kind of go into and go to the well like 10 times instead of just once. And it's interesting because a lot of people like them. Obviously, they're very popular, but I think there's something to that in terms of the mindset of designers that kind of get into this comfort zone and keep on kind of going and kicking at that same can to carry on the metaphor.
Right, and I don't blame them. I really don't. It's like, well, there's so much you can learn even about just one particular design pattern, right? That it's not like, it's not like totally time wasted to really explore something in depth. But yeah, I think it's also because it could be kind of scary, or like, you have no idea what's going to happen in other areas. Yeah.
That's really neat. Just a couple comments from the viewers. Sarah Ship says, to be fair, let's see, art is better at creating emotional intelligence than cognitive intelligence. I agree. Now the question then there becomes, is our games art? What do we think?
Well, I'm going to say that games are better than art. That art should be so lucky as to include games.
Awesome. I like it.
Yeah,
I like it.
Because think about it. we're talking about definitions of art,
Sure.
clearly the definition, or definitions of words in general, clearly art has been there are tons of moribund definitions around that. It's so stale that NFTs happened, right? Like,
oh my gosh.
that could only happen to a stale area. And so I feel bad for traditional notions of art. I think art could probably do a lot better by expanding and stretching and becoming something new. And games might be able to help with that if we so deign to
allow art to
lend a hand. Yeah, but we could just decide to not be art and do something else that would transcend art. So that's another option. Yeah, neo-art is what I call it.
Sarah also said that it's weird that games have pushed so far into pro-establishment themes when those systems likely have very little value for games.
Yeah.
That's
totally
really
agree.
insightful as well, right? It's like, oh, you're not wrong.
Yep.
Right.
Definitely not wrong about that.
And it is interesting. So, Jess, going back to the paper, or the paper to be, or the paper that was going to be about use of games in education, I actually just got off a Clubhouse room with people who are using D&D and such things like that in the classroom and for therapy and whatnot. So, as a therapist, I agree that that's a good thing to try to do, but it's really kind of those weird edges of, is this education? What is this? What do you think about Sarah's comment here? That, games seem to have little value for the people who were trying to make them for, which is this interesting thing that kind of relates to Naomi's thought about games for change. And like, are we trying to kick at something that isn't going to receive?
Right. I think my thought on Sarah's comment is that, one of the reasons why games lean into pro-establishment themes is like easy themes for games are, especially analog games, are things that have simple, graspable structure.
Sure.
And so the themes are easy to build games around because they have surface level, simple, graspable structure. We understand the exchange of money for goods. We understand like a simple way of understanding like economies, basically. And so they're very easy to quote unquote gamify because they are games. And so I think that's why that happens. But yeah, I also think that there is so much out there that's bigger and more expansive and interesting than that games can do. And it takes shaking those themes sometimes to actually get into those spaces, to actually sit down and say to yourself, I want to make a game about having sex with aliens, and then follow through on that. And that gets you something new and interesting.
Just like this new and interesting running header we've got here that says sex positive game design.
Yeah. And so like even in the way that I was working up towards proposing the use of games in the classroom more fundamentally is always as a starting point for education, not as the ending point, not as the end point at all. It was use the game to create a common experience amongst the class. So then we can have a shared experience to base the discussion and the actual learning on. And we can have something hands-on that we can go back to and play with and experiment within the limitations of like real world classrooms, right?
Yeah.
Let's sort of get closer to the sort of Dewey and experiential ideal without having to actually move the classroom entirely outside the classroom, because reaching that educational ideal is just a little bit beyond the scope of things right now.
Well, I mean, yes, because of pandemic, but
structural limitations.
And it's interesting. So I because we're all like academics, educators in this room currently, and well, and if Erica was here, she'd be as well. Naomi, what is your teaching philosophy?
Oh gosh, I should be very clear that I'm a kind of a fake professor. Right? I'm what's called an arts professor, right?
Oh, we just talked about art.
Yeah, we did talk about art, and that's why so because I'm an arts professor, I can make pronouncements like that on art, and they're undisputable. But I don't have a degree, right? I don't have a super formal background in education. So like I've been saying, I've been making games for a long time, and now I teach games. But yeah, I guess I do have an educational philosophy, though. It's that's true too, right? I just don't articulate it as I'm not forced to articulate it as much as I would be if I was like really a part of proper academia. I think it's for games. It's certainly learn by doing. It involves a lot of modding and working with the building blocks of games from a lot of different angles. Starting with different kinds of seeds and constraints, and using constraints creatively. I think it's like a really good approach as well. And then the other big part of it is probably that the most difficult thing to learn is our soft skills and collaboration. So you just do that over and over and over again until you get good at it, because you can't just like watch a lecture about how to be a good collaborator or something like that, right? So you really have to learn that one by doing, and you have to like crash and burn and have problems and things like that. And and then maybe the last thing that we're constantly telling students making games is you have to play test the game right now. You don't wait. You have to do it immediately. Because that's also very, very difficult to get used to, right? So, I don't know. Those are probably the main pillars of my educational philosophy about making games, at least.
Excellent. Yeah. Cool. So we've had this little header here, Jess, for a while. Sorry, you had a great segue, and then I kind of took it off the thing. Yeah. But Jess, I'm going to leave this one to you because I haven't played the game. I haven't played the game yet because you had it, and then you left.
Yeah. So Consentacle, I backed it on Kickstarter. It was amazing. That's how I learned that you were a person. So this is an awesome sex positive game. I also believe, if I'm remembering correctly, you wrote the intro to Honey and Hot Wax, which is
I did, yeah.
So I also have that.
Which, if people don't know, it's a collection of erotic role-playing games for 2 or more people. Yeah, sex-themed role-playing games.
Yeah, it's a fantastic collection. I bought it on Valentine's Day and then sent copies of it to my partners. So it is, it's really cool. Definitely worth looking at if you have like any interest in just like different styles of RPGs. There's some really cool things in there, and a great introduction. So yeah. So you have lots of experience with sex positive games, both in the analog, and you wrote an intro to a collection of LARPs. So maybe you could start by telling us the story of how Consentacle came to be and what it was trying to kick.
Yeah. So the Consentacle was a reactionary game. I have to say it was around 2011 saw a Kickstarter for another game called Tentacle Bento. Some people might remember this. It was in the days when like board game Kickstarter was like really getting off the ground. And I think it was like Soda Pop Miniatures was the publisher, and I forget the designer's name, but they were kickstarting this game, which was it was a tentacle sex game, right? Like to their credit, they were one of the first to sort of do this, but their game. Well, one, it was a very simple trick-taking game. I have nothing against that. But the problem was that the tricks that were being taken you were trying to capture sets of busty college co-eds in that way where it's like, oh, a college girl, you're using that so that there's no underage girls in this. And it was all like sexy playing card style stuff. And the joke that they kept riffing on in the promotional materials was that like, oh, you know what like tentacle monsters like to do with girls. So now you're the tentacle monster and you have to like capture these girls. So this generated a lot of outrage. I was like also kind of like, really? That's what you did? And it got pulled from Kickstarter, I think, due to people making complaints. And I think I forget the designer's name now, but he did a sort of like interview later and was like, yeah, actually he was interviewed and asked about Consentacle, and someone was like, yeah, I think that was probably like a more responsible way to approach the subject. We weren't really thinking about it, and yeah, but it was because of that Kickstarter. I was like, couldn't you do this? Couldn't you treat this topic in a way that was more interesting than that? That was both like not just a competitive trick-taking game of tentacle monsters competing to see how many girls they could capture, but also yeah, like just change the narrative, like flip the script, man. Like, why not do that, right? Like, we already live in a rape culture. Like, why would you just repeat that? We already have like every stupid joke about Japanese hentai that I had to grow up hearing. Like, I don't need to hear the same hentai joke again. Why not flip the script on that too? So I started talking to people about like, hey, what if we did a game about tentacle sex, but it was about consensual tentacle sex, or you were teaching a tentacle. I think the original idea was actually you were teaching a tentacle monster how not to rape people. And so that idea kind of like dwelled in my subconscious for a couple years until Robert Yang, who's another sex positive game designer and developer, approached me because he was the curator of the No Quarter exhibition here in New York City, where they ask at the time they were asking local New York area artists to make a game for the exhibition, and there was like a small budget involved. So I was like, oh, hey, this is cool. I have an opportunity to make this game. There's a budget. I'm going to give it all to an illustrator, which is what I did. And then I'm going to prototype a game and like put a bunch of art on the cards and make an alien sex game. And that, that was basically the whole impetus. And then I had to figure out what the game was going to be, which was a whole other story of like influences and, a little bit of Hanabi, a little bit of Netrunner, a little bit of, David Sirlin's Yomi, or maybe also as like a counter influence. I'm like, I'm going to flip the script on Yomi. Yomi is boring. What's interesting? Collaborative Yomi. Bam, Dave.
we're both down for that, by the way.
Yeah.
Jesse and I have talked on Yomi.
Yeah. My new as the anti-David Sirlin, my motto is play to win together.
Oh.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic.
That is awesome.
Yeah, that's really cool. And then it did super well on Kickstarter, and then I got it. And I don't know where to go with this. Sen, do you have any questions? Thoughts?
Well, I wanted to know, because we had this really weird reaction to your game when we posted about it and, put sex positive in the title of the YouTube. YouTube shut us down for a month.
Right, that's right.
Yeah, right.
And I just wanted to know, like, have you had, similar reactions from, people, stores, whatever, saying we're not carrying that, or we can't have that here. What's up with this sex positive stuff that you're trying to push on us? Puritanical stuff that, was there any of that?
Well, so, I mean, there definitely was the kind of reaction that I don't think that you would get if you were saying like, oh, here's a sex positive book or sex positive film or sex positive documentary series or something, right? Like somehow the combination of sex and games makes people think it's super shady, like it's going to be really shady somehow. So I think that partially has to do with that reputation and the aura that games have, which I was saying was a good thing, where I'm in favor of, but it made a lot of people a little bit nervous about Consentacle in ways that, like, I don't want to push it on anybody, right? I did, every conversation I've had with publishers who, at game expos or wherever, or just in various social groups, has been like, oh man, your game is so cool. I wish we could ever publish something like that ever. Right? It's basically like that, right? Like,
right. It's like you're pushing boundaries here, but we have fiscal responsibilities.
Right. Like, like it's almost just like preemptively apologetic. And in terms of stores, like I actually, I never tried to go around and get stores to carry it. I did take a lot of Kickstarter orders from retailers who assume like, okay, you must be able to sell it to somebody, and they probably have been able to, because at least via like orders, because people keep asking me to get copies, and I didn't set Consentacle up to run as a business, but only as like a one-time run. Like I costed it, I priced it to be affordable, not to be like a sustainable business. So so now there aren't any copies, and so I'm sure like maybe some of the retailers are selling them for like $200 or whatever, which is fine by me. but yeah, like I think it makes people nervous automatically because they think that it might be really shady. Now it's understandable because most sex themed board games are terrible, or like board games and card games, they're just awful, right? They're either like variants on the simple game but with sexy cards, with sexy card art, right?
Right.
Well, you know, like games that you've already played but with sexy card art. Or they are variants on the like sex dice game where you roll a pair of dice and,
the positions,
and you get the results that say like lick ear, and then you have to lick someone's ear. It's almost like the opposite of a game about consent, right? It's about a game about being forced to do things by some dice. They take your willpower away.
Well, you know, the dice said I have to do this, so I have to do it.
Yeah, I have to do it. I don't want to. I don't have any desires myself. Like I wouldn't want to lick ear, but the dice say I have to lick ear now. So it's like, I understand why those games exist, but they're not that interesting to me as designs. And did you know, like, yeah, Bruno Fai Duty made like a weird sex game like that at some point too. Yeah. And it's like, oh, I was like, oh, cool, Bruno Fai Duty made a sex game. Then I looked at it and I was like, this is just a sex dice game, but like with Kama Sutra positions.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm like, oh, I can understand why people might be wary of it, right? And then on top of that, you guys, know like the history of sex positivity in role-playing games has been fraught as well, right? It's haunted by the specter of the creepy game master, who wants to enact his fantasies in a not particularly consensual way on people. And yeah, and so I don't know. It's a haunted area to work in is sort of the way that I think of it. And I guess my approach was to be like as wholesome as possible and just diffuse that. That was my instinct, at least, and it's why Consentacle is not particularly X-rated at all. There's like no nudity in it, and it's kind of friendly. There's nothing particularly edgy other than the fact that there's a tentacled alien, but like it's all pretty above board. Like you have to try really hard to misconstrue what the purpose of this game is. There are people who are like, how can you like say that a game about tentacle rape is sex positive? And I'm like, well, the word consent is in the title, but apparently some people miss it and still think that it's about rape. There are people who think that it's supposed to be like a masturbation aid game. Yeah. One of the cards is gaze, right? It's a sex positive game where some of what you do is just look at each other, because I think that's an erotic move, right? But yeah. But yeah, there are people who were really upset that it wasn't more pornographic. They were sort of like, I can't get off to this artwork on these cards. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, man. That's not really what it's for. So it's interesting because sex is this huge domain of human experience, right? And yet, like the way that we have chosen to treat it and deal with it are strangely limited, right? Like especially in games. Yeah. And I'm thankfully we have other forms of culture to look at. I mean, we're like, oh, movies have sex all over them in a whole bunch of different ways. Sometimes it's terrible. Sometimes it's part of a horror movie in a scary way. Sometimes it's like it's The Shape of Water, and there's like a fish man and a lady having a lovely time together. And sometimes it's just a sex scene. There's so many different types of sex scenes in films. And it's like we should have that many types of sex scenes in games too. And yet somehow we can't quite get it together to do that. And so I think I was determined to at least try. And that's why I was like, okay, I'm going to go all the way to the other end and make something that's really comfortable. That like I've watched a father. I've observed the father watching his two like adolescent sons play this game together, and he was like, yeah, it seems okay. And so I was like, yeah, I guess I made a pretty innocuous, wholesome tentacle sex game. Mission accomplished.
And if I could just gush a tiny bit about like the little details in the game too, just like going off of what you were just saying there about all the different ranges of experiences that could be represented in games and media around this topic. It's like one of the cool mechanics of Consentacle is you're both like playing cards and then you reveal them and then see a little bit of like see what happens. And if you both play the same cards, you get these combos. But not all of the combos are good. There's some things that are just like awkward moments. And so I love that you mechanically captured awkward moments when like having an encounter with an alien you've never met before, which is the setup for the game, right? So like if you both play the kiss card, you end up with this like fumble mouths combo, for example. And it's like, yeah, it's just like, that's a moment. Like that's like a cool, odd, but intimate moment. And the game like captures it and has it there. And I just really loved it.
Yeah, those kinds of moments are so important to me personally and emotionally, where you both like lunge at each other and your heads bonk into each other. You know, like they're important, right? And and so like none of them are totally bad, right? They actually just sort of slow the pace of the encounter down a little bit, and sometimes that could be desirable depending on what you're going for. So yeah, I was trying to get sort of thank you for noticing that detail.
Yeah, no, and that's right. Actually, I've played a lot of Consentacle, and there are some times where the exact right thing to do is actually the awkward moment, given how the resources are currently standing and how everything else is. So yeah. No.
So I have a couple comments from the viewers, and then I have a comment that I wanted to ask you, or question actually. So Sarah Ship asks, "Have you thought of doing a second edition?"
Oh yeah, so of course I think about doing it. How to do it is the big question, right? Because if I had followed like classic, like Stegmeyer advice on how to run your board game business, I would have could charge like $40 for this game, and then I would just print more copies of it and have them in a warehouse somewhere. But as it is, I think I would have to like either do another Kickstarter, which technically isn't allowed unless you like are changing a bunch of stuff, which I don't really want to do. Like I would change some small things, right? Or I would have to, if there are any like really awesome print-on-demand companies out there who want to set up a system. Like the last time I looked at the print-on-demand systems, they weren't quite set up in the way that I would find useful, which would be like, take a whole bunch of orders, and then when there's a thermometer that goes up, and when it reaches 4,000 orders or whatever, then it's like you unlock the second edition being printed, and if you get to 7,000 orders, then it all becomes cheaper or something like that. Like, I think that kind of system would be awesome. If anybody wants to make one, it would make printing more editions of very niche games much easier.
That'd be a neat thing to talk to JT about at the Game Crafter, because I know they're basically one-offs, right? But what you're talking about is like actually generating an MOQ, like a MOQ for that specific game, and then hitting print when it reaches that MOQ. And I think from his perspective,
that's how I would set it up.
Yeah, he'd say it costs just as much to run the lasers and whatever, because it's not offset, right? That's the thing. It's like. It's like just one print, and we don't have to reset, which costs more, and all these things. But yeah, I mean, there might be a way. I mean, obviously, GMT used to do like P500s, where it's like we need 500 people. If 500 people commit to the game, then we'll print a print run, which is sort of like the proto Kickstarter version.
Right. Yeah, that was the proto version, and I think that there is who is it that. There's a print-on-demand RPG company that does something sort of like this.
Drive-thru?
It might be part of Drive-thru. Yeah, like doesn't Drive-thru have a?
They do.
Like a print-on-demand thing, but or that's related to like quantity, but it doesn't quite work like what I'm describing either.
No, it doesn't. They're just one-offs again.
It's just one-offs, right?
Drive-thru cards, Drive-thru RPGs.
That's what I was thinking of, yeah.
They're all kind of like that. And I don't think there is anything that works quite the way you'd like it to, because of it's actually mechanical, I think. I don't know enough about offset printing to actually speak to this with much knowledge, except for the fact that I know with offset printing, you set it up, and every time you stop it to change it, it costs money. So they want to set it up once, run all the prints of that, and then change it to another machine, right?
Right. But that's exactly why I'm saying like you don't even do the setup until you reach a certain large threshold. Right. Yeah, you hit that large threshold, and that's why it's cheaper per unit to make 10,000 copies of a game than it is to make 5,000 copies, right? And as far as I'm concerned, like 5,000 copies is the absolute minimum that like is worth doing at all. And like other people would say no, it's like 10 or 20, right? But yeah, like I don't know. I think that there's a threshold at which it becomes cost effective to like turn on to like do that setup to set it all up.
Yeah.
And then as you get to larger quantities, then it just becomes like a better price per unit, because Yeah, because the setup is the really expensive thing. Putting all those plates on, like setting up all the plates in the first place, all that stuff.
I think I do know. I don't spend a lot of time around the Game Crafter because we're in Canada, so it's really expensive to ship stuff from the Game Crafter. But even though they're just like a little bit of across the border, but I know they do like a Make 100 thing as well. But I'm not exactly sure what that exactly is. So I'd have to ask JT or Ben or somebody.
Yeah.
Other questions? Hey, more questions. Jim Baker asked, does GameFound have the same rule that you need to change a majority of the design? So a couple things about GameFound, Jim, is that GameFound isn't really open for everybody to use quite yet. They're picking and choosing their campaigns at this time to kind of like build the system. So in video game terms, they're looking for like system sellers, right? Like big things that they know are going to hit close to 1 million each and every time. So that's what's going to come out of the gate from GameFound first. It'll be like, so the next one I think is like Robinson Crusoe, Kingdom Rush by Jesse and Helena and myself was like the second one on there, third one. And the first few were their own that they knew were going to do really well from Awakened Realms. So I can't swear that GameFound can do that. But Indiegogo might be another thing. There's other crowdfunding things that we don't even know about.
There are definitely other ways of doing it. Yeah. Yeah, and honestly, it's because this is kind of a side gig for me, right? Like I spend most of my time teaching and helping to run the NYU Game Center. It's like, the more I can, I can sort of rely on some existing system to handle it, right? So like Indiegogo, I could raise money that way, right? But then I would have to be like, I don't know, call up Panda or GameCrafter or somebody, be like, okay, let's like set up this whole business and do it again, and fulfillment, all of that kind of stuff. So. Yeah, I don't know.
Or you could find a sex positive publisher.
Yeah, or I could find a sex positive publisher. It's true, and I do occasionally. I have had some like very tentative conversations with some people. Sex positive publishers, I have to tell you, they are smaller and more struggling.
For sure.
For sure.
Yeah. Or the ones that are specifically billing themselves that way, right?
Yes.
What would be nice is if there were a large publisher that were like, you know what, let's be a sex positive publisher. That hasn't quite happened yet, but I suspect that maybe it will within the next decade.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it will happen at some point, and especially if there is a market, right? That's usually what drives those changes.
Yeah. So please make some more people make some more board games about sex, please. I've shown you that you can do it, and it doesn't have to be sex dice or Bruno Faidudi's Kama Sutra. Yeah.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be that.
Before we get on to the New York Game Center, which you just mentioned, Adam Young has another question. When you are streamlining and refining the games, do you worry about accidentally reinforcing the wrong assumptions or not doing the issues justice? Is there a worry about trying to put too much or too little to create adequate context? And the last part of that, do session zeros, marketing, and intro copy do enough?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So like we were just talking about how you could accidentally send the opposite message, right, with a game. And in my experience, that's often because games are leaving a lot of things open, or they're trying to be a little mysterious, or they have like a very specific message that they're trying to drill into people's head that would be compromised by saying it too overtly and too bluntly, right? So they have to try and like worm it in there through the mechanics, and that can go wrong. So in the case of Consentacle, I didn't have to worry about that because I'm not trying to send a particular message. Consentacle is not a game that's like, hey folks, consent is good. You should only have consensual sex. Like that's not really the way the game works. The game is more, I think of it more like a weightlifting machine that you use to build up your skills at communicating with someone else and being able to do perspective taking and put yourself into their position, right? Like, because that's like the kind of Yomi that I'm interested in. And so I was able to, this is probably the thing that I iterated the most on, is what Adam is saying is at the end there, right? Like the intro copy, the framing of the game, making it clear what this game is about, like what your goal in this game is, was all sort of like fine-tuned to like make sure that people were getting the right idea of what was going on. And then there were also like sort of what I think of as safety exits, right? There's a rule in the game that basically lets you cancel any move if you don't feel comfortable with it, right? And I've never seen anyone use that rule, which is fine. Like it's fine if I made a plane and nobody ever opened the emergency exit also. Like
that is also true, yes.
other than testing, right? Like you don't necessarily want people to open that during flight, but it's there in case you need to use it, right? So, yeah, so I think those kinds of things are important too. And they also send a message of like, hey, you don't have to worry about this. You can just sort of like cancel it at any time. So I think that there are all of these different pieces of context. It's not just session 0 or just the introductory text, but it's how you frame every single thing in the game and like how every piece of it fits together, kind of all points in the same direction. Yeah.
And so while the game never overtly comes out and says consent is a good thing, in any like
it's an assumption that's already there in the background of the entire thing.
And the whole product speaks to that as opposed to a single message. Very cool. Raha asked a question. Yes, late to the show, so ignore this if you've already got onto this topic. But Raha's curious to what Naomi thinks about whether games can or should serve advocacy or educational goals. We talked about this a little bit, but I think the idea that advocacy is a little bit different than education, sort of. And if so, do you have thoughts on the circumstances or criteria where this can be effective?
Yeah, so I guess what I basically said is that games are like donkeys. They're unruly, and they are not naturally suited to being beasts of burden in this way. And you should be compassionate towards them and think like, how do I work with a donkey if I don't want to just kick and go buck wild to do something completely different than my intended message of advocacy or education? And I think we're just starting to figure that out. We're like among the first or second generation of donkey handlers. Of just like at some point human beings were in 100,000 BC, like when first taming some donkeys. We're like, what are we going to do with these donkeys? Donkeys are a menace to society. We'll figure it out. We'll figure out what.
I feel like there's a game here.
I totally feel like there's a game in here somewhere.
Yeah, probably there is. And so I think it's a tricky business. It's just not straightforward. I don't think the more straightforward and linear the design approach is for doing advocacy or education, I think the more likely it is to just fall over or do the opposite of what it intends to do. I think a lot of times these things have to come sidelong. And I don't know, like, so for instance, I think that Mary Flanagan's work with Tilt Vector and Resonym, like, she has a very interesting sidelong approach that kind of like it just Tai Chi's its way around the problem of like how to send the message, right? It's not karate, which is I can denigrate karate because I'm Japanese. Instead, it's Tai Chi. It's circular, right? So
there you go. That's a really interesting perspective as well, because I know whenever we're talking about education and game design and games and education, almost all of the designers and teachers say we'll always say, like, don't make a game that explicitly didactically teaches that thing. You can use games to educate around the subject that are actually even more interesting ways of doing things, and like bringing that link back to the student of, you see what you did here? This is like this, which is actually, when you think about how people learn, a little bit more useful than like super on the nose type of teaching situations, right?
And more and more people are aware of this now, right? It's like there's a rising tide lifting everybody up and being like, oh, this way that people used to make educational video games in the 1980s is just overly didactic and doesn't work. And I don't know, I feel like we keep having to have that conversation, right? It's not totally ingrained or second nature yet. It's like been happening over and over again in games for change in various fields. But
because the idea that you said, Naomi, that you have to kind of go at it sidelong is not the very first thing people think of. They think, oh, I got to make a game to teach geography. I guess it should be about geography. I guess you should have a map.
And if you are just getting paid a paycheck to make something, and then it has to be assessed of like, did the kids learn geography? Then of course you might want to take the straightforward route, because working with games is very risky. You don't know what's going to happen, and so again, it goes back to this conservative approach.
Yeah, very much so. All right, so let's move on to the New York Game Center. Tell me, what's your role there? What do you do? What do your students do? What have they done? I know that there is something you want to tell us about that's pretty cool.
Oh yeah. So and the NYU Game Center, we're the game design department of New York University. So students apply to us to come study and major in game design, and most of our students make work on video games. They learn to use like Unity and Unreal and make video games, and some of them go on to work in various parts of the industry, from like large to small, or games for change, like we were just talking about, educational games and so forth. But then we have we do a lot of analog game design as well, in part because we think it sort of develops the same kinds of muscles that you need to be a good video game designer. And so a lot of our students get interested in that, even if that wasn't why they were coming to school in the first place. And yeah, I just wanted to toot the horn of this game Chroma that 4 of my students worked on, who graduated a couple of years back now. But it's a beautiful game. It's played on top of a triangular light box with triangular pieces. It's an abstract strategy game, which is interesting. It's like, I wouldn't have expected like one of the big hits to sort of come out of working with games to be an abstract strategy game. And in fact, this team is all like women and non-binary people. And when they were in the process of developing this game, they actually got nagged a bit by some visiting professional game designer who was like, "Oh, are you sure you girls want to make an abstract strategy game? That's like such a hardcore like masculine genre." And like, "Oh, it's very pretty what you've done, but maybe you want to do something that has a little bit more story or something like that." But yeah, like it'll make more sense if you see what it looks like. Yeah, no, that's the bad story that sort of goes with this game. But I don't want to dwell too much on that. Like the way that this game works is that you have layers of pieces that build up on the board, right? So it actually uses the translucent pieces and the combinations of color that result in a strategic way. So I'm really proud of the team that worked on this. And it's coming to Kickstarter this summer through Breaking Games. So yeah, I'm here to plug this game, even though it's not my game. It's like pride of the NYU Game Center analog games division.
Well, you're a teacher, and we teachers often plug their students because it makes us proud, makes us so very proud. Something else that you do at the NYU or with the NYU Game Center is the Discourse. What is that all about, and how do we tune in?
Yeah, so if you come by our Twitch channel, which I think is twitch.tv/NYU Game Center, on Mondays at noon, we do a streaming talk show, and it's basically a news show. It's me. I'm a professor at the Game Center, and Frank Lance, who's the director and chair of the Game Center. We kind of helped found and like runs the whole show, and we just talk about news from the world of games, like all sorts of things, like ranging across video games and analog games. We talked about the double bong cloud opening this week. I don't know if either of you caught that, but it was a weird thing from the world of chess, where 2 of the greatest chess players in the world did a game where there was what's called a double bong cloud opening, which is one of the stupidest ways to open a game of chess.
I see. Yeah.
And it's like the equivalent of a taunt, right, in a fighting game, where you're just like, I'm gonna spend a whole bunch of time just pointing at you and laughing instead of actually fighting you. Yeah, just be like, yeah, come here. But it's the chess equivalent of that, and both of them just cracked up like in this chess game, this very high level tournament chess game. So it was like a beautiful analog gaming moment. So we talk about stuff like that and give our takes on it. And so, yeah, it's a funny show. We hang out with our students in Twitch chat, but also like a whole bunch of other visiting game designers from across the world of games. So yeah, you should come by and check it out.
Well, check it out. Very cool. So that's Mondays at noon Eastern Standard Time. Eastern Daylight.
That's right.
Eastern Daylight Time. Whatever
Eastern
we're in.
Time. Yeah. Eastern time. Noon Eastern.
And it's the Discourse, NYU Game Center /videos on your Twitch stream. Excellent. Now, let's talk about your future projects, because I had to say, mind blown yet again. when I saw those things come up. So Lace Runner, tell us about Lace Runner. That's amazing.
Okay, yeah. So this is where I get myself in trouble because I have to talk about it, even though it's like in progress. And I guess it's good to hold my own feet to the fire because I'm going to try and finish it this year. Lace Runner is I guess you could say it's a total conversion of Netrunner. Not every single card, but if you're familiar with Android Netrunner, the trading card game, it's no longer being published by Fantasy Flight, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's I decided that Netrunner would be more interesting if it was a comedy of manners instead of a game about hacking. I was like, this game feels like when I played Netrunner with people, I was like, oh, this game has some interesting Yomi. You're like setting traps for me, and I'm like, ooh, where are your traps? This is really delicious. And so first I was like playing with my friends and I was like, oh, we should play this like, and drink tea and like glare at each other. And I was like, why is this a game about, why is everything we're doing, this intensely social experience, all represented as like, I'm sending some ice virtual constructs into your server and then, hacking. Like, it's like completely cold, to me at least. Like, I like Cyberpunk. It's like some of the first games I worked on were Cyberpunk games, but I'm like, it just doesn't have the same appeal for me. So I decided to just transpose the entire content of that game into social climbing in Victorian or like in 19th century Europe. So instead of a hacker, you're a social climber who's like maybe an artist or like a bourgeois business type or a revolutionary student, and so then you're being opposed by like the great houses and mercantile interests of Europe as the corpse, who are up to all sorts of nefarious things in a real life historical context, right? So. And so instead of hacking into a server, you're going to a party, and there are all these obnoxious party guests who are trying to like, brush you off or like get you kicked out of the party, which is the equivalent. That's more interesting to me. People getting drunk at a party instead of like I run my icebreaker program on you. I don't know. So I'm working with an art historian on that game, and so all of the cards are like going to be full. Full bleed cards where it's all public domain artworks, high resolution printed on the cards that portray different things from they're all from 19th century Europe, and then I've just rethemed all the content. So I'm ripping off Fantasy Flight games completely, but I've changed all the words. All the words are different, but the grammatical structure of the sentences on the cards is the same as as in Netrunner. So I'm which allows the game to be played in exactly the same way.
Now the question is, can I merge the two sets together?
Yeah, you definitely can, because I haven't changed any rules at all.
So what you're saying is you could try to get drunk inside a computer?
Yeah, you could. You could just have a mixture of cards. I think there's some people who really want to do this. Although the problem is, I hate how small trading cards are. So I'm probably going to do them all as like oversized tarot cards again. I only like large cards. That's just
I like big cards, and I cannot lie.
Right. I just want like big. A good reason for cards to exist, in my opinion, is just to serve as a vehicle for artwork. Artwork, and then plus like some layers of meaning on top of it. That's how I designed Consentacle. And so I don't see why. And so I hate the trading card convention of putting a bunch of like weird framing gobbledygook on the outside of the artwork. I don't know
Sarah
why.
Sarah says, fun fact, sci-fi of manners is an actual subgenre of fiction.
Good to know. I'm going to have to look that up. I will have to look that up. For sure.
Sarah, if you have any titles or authors that Naomi can look up, please do share them in the chat. Thank you so much. That's awesome. Our meeps are wonderful people. They're like wide breadth of people. There's game designers. There's people with like in fine arts. There's lawyers. There's everybody in Meeple Syrup Land is cool. So there you go.
Oh, nice. I actually just Googled it, and it turns out that I have recently read A Fantasy of Manners, The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison, which was quite good, I have to say.
That sounds like something we should read, Jesse, because of faults. I did want to ask you one more thing. Oh, there it is. Lace, Xenolanguage. So First Contact.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah, so that's in fact my next game to be released is called We'll Meet Again Some Starry Day. It's a short role-playing game for 2 people to be played over Zoom. But why would I have done that in this year? I don't know. Like it was easier to play tests, that's for sure. No tabletop simulator needed. Yeah, it's coming out later this year as part of First Contact, which is this collection of games about first contact with aliens. I guess that's why, that also explains why I was recruited for this project, because I apparently have some expertise with alien contact games at this point. But yeah, and that collection is accompanying Xenolanguage, the new game from Thorny Games, who are just absolutely brilliant role-playing game designers who do games about language and history and culture. So actually, I'm really looking forward to. Yeah,
I was just gonna say, Jesse. What? Given your current area of research, you should literally get in touch with these people. Like literally get in touch with them. One of their games is about dying languages. Like literally, that's what it is.
Yeah, cool.
That might be something that you could pick up on and think about. Like, how do we use this in a way to educate about Indigenous languages? Sarah has some titles for you. She said, "To Say Nothing of the Dog" by Connie Willis is a great place to start. And she also agrees that Goblin Emperor is one of her favorites as well. So Jesse, looks like we got something on our reading list as well. Goblin Emperor. Yeah. Goblin Emperor. Excellent. So Xenolanguage First Contact should be coming out soon on Kickstarter, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so it's been kickstarted. I think that I think there's almost certainly going to be like other ways of ordering it, but cool. The Kickstarter rewards are going out I think later this summer. The collection is in editing right now, so it's getting finalized, and and so check it out. I think I might be allowed to release it independently as well, which I would do, like in the future after the collection comes out. Right. But it's a game about missing your friend and telling stories to each other about what's happened while you've been apart.
It'd be like me and Jess.
Aww, you miss me.
Yeah.
Of course I miss you. You're like so far away from me. I miss you entirely. So we have lots of stuff coming up from Naomi. Lace Runner in the future. Xenolanguage First Contact coming out soon. You can check her out on the Discourse, which is noon Eastern time on NYU Game Center's Twitch channel. And you can see what students from the NYU Game Center make when Chroma is hitting Kickstarter later this summer. So lots and lots of stuff coming out. Naomi, where can people reach you on Twitter?
Yeah, my Twitter handle is Metasynthy. That's it right there. Yeah, so like that's a good place to, my DMs are open if you ever want to contact me. I can't promise an immediate response because I'm one of those people who have like 1,000 unread emails in my inbox already. but I try to get back to people who have inquiries or have questions.
Excellent. And I've always actually meant to ask you, does Metasynthy stand for anything?
Oh, good question. Yeah, I haven't been asked that in a long time. It's a combination of it's the root is the word synthesis, right?
Yeah.
Like as an analysis and synthesis. And I think I made it up at some point when I was talking about synthesis and thinking about like, well, what would a synthesis across multiple disparate fields be? It would be like a metasynthesis.
It
and
is.
Someone, I think a friend of mine who was I was talking to at the time just thought that was like a hilariously over pretentious word, so it somehow ended up as my internet handle. I've been using it like since message board days.
Oh, wow.
Like since the early 2000s, I think in this case.
Yeah. Very cool. So you can reach Naomi at Metasynthy on Twitter. Erica, who's not with us today, is Erica Buyuris on Twitter. Jesse is not ever going to answer you, but you can still mention him.
You can mention me.
Hey, dude, you were mentioned today.
Into the void.
Yeah, you were mentioned today. So there you go. Did you actually know why you were mentioned today?
Why was I mentioned today?
Because the cover for one of our games was released today.
Which game?
Vaults.
Oh, cool! I didn't even know.
Oh my gosh, Tess. The worst. You're the worst.
I make games and then I put them out in the world and go on make the next one.
Yeah, that's sort of what I do too.
Yeah, I sympathize. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can always find me at Senfeng Lim on Twitter. If you like what you saw today and like what we're doing, please do support us at Patreon. www.patreon.com/maple syrup. It helps keep the lights on and keeps all of this stuff running and going. And we are a proud part of the RTP Network, Roll to Play Network, which is a audio network of podcasts and shows, including ours, that has to deal with stuff like role-playing games and board games and card games. So analog gaming at its finest at the RTP Network. So, hey, Naomi, can you give our listeners one piece of final advice? What would you tell them if they were students, maybe in your class?
Oh, great. Yeah. Okay. I love this part. So my advice is sometimes when you get negative feedback about a game, it's actually positive feedback in disguise because it tells you what kind of game you have not made. And
Awesome.
And if you realize, wait a second, that's exactly the kind of game I didn't want to make, then you've succeeded, right? And my example for this is that actually when I was designing Consentacle, I ran into a small group of playtesters that were trying to play it like a very serious strategy game with like an economy that they had to manipulate. And they were not looking at each other or engaging with each other at all. They were sort of playing a cooperative game like you would play like a game of chess or something, right? Just sort of like really thinking about the state of the game. And I was like, wow, this is absolutely not how I want the game to be played. And they hated it. They didn't have any fun at all. I was like, that's perfect. You should not have any fun at all if you play the game that way. This like sort of negative result was, just as in science, sometimes like that's actually the result that you're looking for. It's the one that, or it actually has useful information that it failed in a certain way, right? Because you're like, okay. Perfect. So actually that prompted me to push it even further away from that and make that kind of like even more impossible and more of a failure, and like take it more towards the direction where it's like, no, you absolutely should not play the game like it's a purely structural strategy game.
That's a really good way of framing it too, in terms of design feedback. So many people are averse to negative feedback or constructive feedback, whatever you want to call it, and they don't see the benefit in it. They don't they just throw it away because they don't like it. I talked about this with other people. Like, I don't mark in red pen anymore. I mark in purple. My students know me for marking in purple because they're so adverse to red, seeing red on paper, that a lot of them just would, if you write on red, they'll just crumple it up and throw it in the garbage, not even read your feedback, which is like the most important part. So I've changed to write it in purple to just induce them to actually maybe read it. Just please read this because I spent a lot of time writing you feedback and I want you to improve. Anyway, but yes, this is a really good and really, really positive way to spin the feedback. Not so it's like, it's still negative, like it's like this wasn't fun, but then it at least tells you something. It informs you about your game state and where to go next. And I think any feedback that you can use to progress in one direction or the other is good.
Exactly. And it informs you about the negative space that surrounds your game, because your game is not everything, right? You have to know what it's not too. Yeah.
Perfect. Excellent. Thanks so much, Naomi. It was wonderful having you here. I can't believe it took us 2 years to get you on. Please don't let that happen again.
Hooray,
like if you ever want to talk about anything, just poke Jesse, Erica, or myself and say, hey, I got something to talk about. Last time you let me sit for 2 years. How about we do it sooner than that? So I'd actually be more than happy with having like, hey, it's the Naomi Clark hour, and we'll just talk about Naomi Clark once in a while, and that would be fine by me because it was brilliant to have you here. I love hearing from other people in education as well as in games, thinking about gaming at just that slightly. It's not elevated level, but it's just different. It's a different viewpoint on things. And I really appreciate all of the differences you talked about today. Donkey for Change will be our new hashtag. I think Raha has made that the new hashtag. But next week, Jesse, you might actually want to come for this one too. I know it's hard for you to get here on time, but next week is Hot Banana Games. That is Pauline and Mary from out west in Canada. They are two Chinese people women designers, and they made a game called Steam Up, and it is my culture in a box, and I'm so happy that it exists or will exist. It's coming to Kickstarter, so please do come to Maple Syrup next week just to show how much support we can generate for that, and we'll see you then. Hashtag Stop Asian Hate, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Very cool. So thanks, Naomi. Jess, great to see you.
Thank you both. It's been awesome.
Yeah, we'll see everybody later. All right, goodbye.
Bye.